Naruto is one of the most popular anime series ever. To this day, the story continues with Naruto's son Boruto. On the other hand, the One Piece anime will get a new adaptation soon. In addition, the manga is still ongoing. But what about the third work of the big three, Bleach? It still seems that many people don't want to recognize Bleach as part of the big three. Naruto and One Piece are safe, but what about Bleach? Time and again you hear that Dragon Ball should actually take its place, or even Hunter x Hunter. Bleach has no impact, no story, and it's just bland. But is that actually true? In my eyes, Bleach is incredibly misunderstood and even a masterpiece. And I'll explain why. Ichigo. I think Ichigo is one of the most underrated protagonists ever. Ichigo goes through a lot of fears in Bleach. The fear of not being able to protect his friends or of being too weak. When he loses his power, he feels useless. He is afraid of his hollow and the resulting loss of control. All of this leads to Ichigo not being able to accept who he is. Hollow Ichigo then tells him that he would even take over his mind in a dangerous situation. However, Hollow Ichigo has no moral compass. This leads to even more fear in Ichigo. In the Erinka arc, Ichigo's personality becomes increasingly divided. Ichigo puts the lives of his friends above his own. Zangetsu, on the other hand, wants to protect Ichigo at all costs. Ichigo's main problem at that point was that he was afraid of his inner demons. Instead of facing these fears, however, he continues to distance himself from them. Later, however, he allows Zangetsu to stab him to show that he accepts his inner beast even if it puts his friends in danger. At first, Ichigo doesn't even really want to take on the job of Soul Reaper, but he's forced to do it in order to help other people. Later, however, he accepts his fate when he remembers his mother's death and his destiny to save people. As a result, Ichigo continues to develop, and what was once a compulsion to fight increasingly becomes a joy. He fights Kenpachi, who shows him how much fun and joy there is in a fight. Byakuya shows him that you should fight for your ideals. Against Grimmjow, Ichigo learns that you should not underestimate his rivals. He also awakens in him the desire to overwhelm his opponents in a battle to demonstrate his superiority. However, the fight against Okuriora annoys him because he didn't really fight him. He even offers to cut off his body parts to have a fair fight. From this point, it becomes clear that Ichigo is a real fighter. His morals have become secondary. After this arc, he loses his power. Ichigo feels useless and would do anything to become his old self again. He would even kill. In the Fullbringer arc, Ichigo must regain his morals. In the fight against Ginjo, he learns that there are always different perspectives and Ichigo must understand the perspectives of others. Ichigo's moral compass is changing. In the fight against Ginjo, he understood him. He would never kill him because he can understand his attitude. However, he still cannot accept it. The situation is different with Hyuavach. His actions went too far. Ichigo could never understand Hyuavach. Killing him is therefore justifiable for Ichigo because there would be no understanding in this scenario. Hyuavach is also indirectly responsible for the death of Ichigo's mother, which naturally means that revenge also plays an important role in this final arc. However, his Zangetsu, or the old man, actually wants to keep Ichigo out of the battle. Since Ichigo is a Shinigami but also a Quincy, he is caught between two sides. However, since this is not possible, Ichigo gains his full power in the 1000-year Blood War arc, which brings him into a better balance. He uses the power of White Ichigo and those of his actual Zangetsu. Self-acceptance has thus reached a new level in this arc. In the story of Bleach, Ichigo must learn to accept himself. He must accept death and not run away from reality. The moment he accepts Zangetsu, Ichigo shows that he must accept death. It is something inevitable. He also learns that he must fight for himself. Ichigo can finally let go of the duty that was imposed on him as a child. The death of his mother is probably the most tragic event in his life. Ichigo thought that he saw a ghost and wanted to go to it, but then a terrible accident happened. His mother protected Ichigo from something. Unfortunately, she died in the process. Little Ichigo blames himself and thinks he was responsible for his mother's death. He felt that he should be punished for his transgression. However, his father reminds Ichigo that his mother died to protect someone. Ichigo takes this to heart. He wants to protect everything and everyone, even if it cost him his life. This mindset of Ichigo is a recurring theme throughout Bleach. For me, this is exactly why Ichigo is not a bland character who just wants to protect his friends. Ichigo is much more than that. For me, he's a much more mature protagonist, especially when compared to Naruto or Luffy. He doesn't have that one big dream that he has been pursuing since the beginning. His dreams are more tangible. He's always struggling with himself. His fears are real and understandable. By the way, if you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, please do so. I've noticed that most of you aren't following me yet, and it would really mean a lot to me if you did. Aizen. I think that in order to understand Bleach better, we definitely need to focus more on Aizen. People generally follow the strongest, bravest, or smartest individuals. However, they are afraid to reach those heights themselves. Aizen wants to become exactly that kind of person. Someone who stands above others. Even in the Soul Society, Aizen is considered someone who's unmatched. But even Aizen is not above everything. He knows that very well. To this day, no one has dared to oppose heaven. But Aizen wants to stand above even these people. Kubo also repeatedly incorporates biblical references. For example, Ulquiorra asked Orihime if she would be willing to give her body and spirit to Aizen. This is a direct correlation to the Bible. May your whole spirit, soul, and body be preserved blameless at the coming of our Lord Jesus. Many people follow and trust the higher being. Aizen himself believes that he is this higher being. He believes that he alone is the chosen one. Gods are born supports the thesis. He came into the world this way and is destined to assume this position. His goal is to take the position of Soul King. He wants to give the Hollows a reason to exist. He wants to lead them. This raises the question of how justified Aizen's behavior is. The current Soul King lets the Hollows walk into a trap and have them killed. Aizen, on the other hand, wants to give them a better opportunity. Nevertheless, his approach is, of course, extremely questionable. He kills anyone who stands in his way. He also manipulated and controlled Ichigo to achieve his goal. There's so much more to Aizen's character, but that would be going too far here. Aizen really deserves his own video. No emotions. That's a phrase I've heard time and time again. Bleach seems to focus solely on coolness, but never on emotional moments. But here too, I would disagree. Let's take the death of Ulquiorra as an example. He was one of the fan favorites from the beginning, so it would have been obvious to give in an emotional last moment. But Kubo doesn't go down that path. There are no big speeches or exaggerated emotions on the characters' faces. Ulquiorra doesn't even get a flashback. Instead, his character arc is alluded to in another manga panel. And it's moments like these that Bleach thrives on. Kubo doesn't spoon feed you. He puts the fork in front of you, but he doesn't tell you where the knife is. That's exactly why emotional moments in Bleach don't usually seem particularly emotional at first glance, precisely because Kubo doesn't throw the emotions in your face. Instead, he hints at them subtly. In addition, feelings are much more complex in real life. When someone dies, it's not just sadness that exists. That's why Bleach often shows several emotions at the same time in important moments. If we just stick with Ulquiorra's death, Ichigo isn't just sad. He regrets the fight, is dissatisfied, feels empty, and is sad, but he is also happy. Worldbuilding. Bleach worldbuilding is also often criticized, especially when compared to other titles. You often hear that Bleach's worldbuilding isn't that good. In Bleach, the most important locations are Soul Society, the world of the living, Hueco-Mondo, Ryo Palace, Mukin, and the Shadow Realm. What I like most about the world building is the look of the locations. Hueco-Mondo and Soul Society in particular always looked so cool. I also like the connection and the explanation of why people now live in this place. For example, the Quincy live in the Shadow Realm because they had to retreat there after the war, or how the true world came into being. Bleach has also very cool, well-developed people. There are normal humans, the Fullbringers, who are humans with special abilities such as Chat. Then there are the Quincy, who have been at war with the Shinigami for years because the Quincy seem to causing an imbalance. The Shinigami hunt the Hollows. The Hollows actually live in Hueco-Mondo, but they keep straying into the human world. And the Arrancar, who are the next stage of Hollow evolution. All of these races have unique connections to each other. And above it all, of course, hovers Ichigo, who represents all these people. Then there's the combat system in Bleach, which is also a part of the world building. The most important aspect is probably the Sanpaku system. Each of these swords contains a soul that has no real character. The wielder of the sword then transfers their own soul to the spirit in the sword, so you personalize it subconsciously. You can even contact the spirit of the sword, provided you know the spirit's name. We see the struggle especially with Kenpachi. At first he relied solely on brute force, but after his defeat he had to realize that working with the Sanpaku actually has only advantages. In addition to the Sanpaku, there are also the Kiddo spells, the Fullbringers have their own objects to fight with, or the Quincy, who also fight in a completely different way. They draw their energy from their surroundings and tend to fight from a distance. I think the combat system in Bleach is unbelievable cool, but I can understand that it can be sometimes a bit confusing and that a lot of things aren't immediately obvious. As for the general world of Bleach, I have to say that I really love many aspects of it, but I don't like everything about it. It was always difficult for me to understand exactly where these places are located. I also didn't understand a lot of things when I read the manga and had to research for myself what Kubo actually meant by it. The first arc. Before I started reading Bleach, I was always taught that the beginning wasn't that great. Unlike the others, the Agent of the Shinigami arc is quite episodic, and actually that makes sense. First and foremost, the arc aims to familiarize you with the world, but also with Ichigo and the other characters such as Chad, Orihime, and Ishida. Ichigo's flashback is particularly important as it reveals why Ichigo is the way he is. In addition, the first arc is also a kind of training period for Ichigo. He first has to get to know his powers better. One thing that also needs to be mentioned is the influence of Yu Yu Hakusho on Bleach. Yu Yu Hakusho was the first real manga by Hunter x Hunter artist Togashi. Alongside Dragon Ball, Yu Yu Hakusho was one of the most influential manga at the time. Naruto and Bleach were more influenced by it, while One Piece was more influenced by Dragon Ball. And just to clarify one thing, it's completely normal to draw inspiration from other works. I can therefore well imagine that Bleach was more episodic at the beginning, as Yu Yu Hakusho also started that way. But that's just a guess. For me personally, the first arc of Bleach isn't the absolute highlight. Nevertheless, it's not nearly as bad as some people claim. It has a lot of cool moments that you definitely don't want to miss. Ichigo's strength. One point that has come up again and again is that Ichigo is too strong, has plot armor, and there are too many ass pulls. I already went into detail about this at the beginning, so I will keep it short here. In my opinion, Ichigo's transformations are not really ass pulls. His hollow form was teased very early on in Bleach. White Ichigo tells him that he would take over his body to save Ichigo. His Quincy genes and connection to Hyuga were also foreshadowed very early on. The old man in Zengetsu couldn't tell Ichigo his name at the time because he was part of Hyuga and had lost his name through Ishibe. In the anime, however, you can easily hear the name Hyuga. And of course, Ichigo is extremely strong. He seems to possess every power imaginable. But we mustn't forget that this is an important part of his character, namely self-acceptance and being at peace with himself. And secondly, Ichigo is the chosen one, which is a typical trope for battle shonen. Luffy and Naruto are also the chosen ones who must bring peace. The difference, however, is that Kubo never made a secret of it. From the beginning, Ichigo is considered special. He can see ghosts, he is incredibly strong, he has a special Sanpakuto, and so on. Why Bleach is the most influential manga of the big three. Both Naruto and One Piece have had an immense influence on today's manga, and that's completely understandable, of course. Today's mangaka grew up with works like One Piece and Naruto, but I think Bleach's influence is even greater. In Demon Slayer, you can clearly see inspiration from Bleach. Humans become demons and cause considerable harm to people around them. However, in the case of the strongest demons, we see through flashbacks, for example, that they are still human inside. This shows similarities to the Hollows and the Arrancar. The Hashira, who must eliminate the demons, bear strong similarities to the Gotei 13. Gotoge, the mangaka of Demon Slayer, has also said that she loves Bleach very much. In JJK, however, the similarities are even stronger. Yuji is actually a completely normal human being who stands out, especially physically. When he meets the sorcerer Megumi, he eats one of Sukuna's fingers. As a result, a beast now lives inside Yuji. It's similar with Ichigo. Through contact with Rukia, he becomes a Shinigami. Like Yuji, Ichigo has an inner beast, White Ichigo. The two can also talk to each other, just like Yuji and Sukuna. Like Ichigo, Yuji feels compelled to save the lives of all humans, especially after the death of his grandfather. The design of the curses in JJK also bears some similarities to the designs of the Hollows. Just like Gotoge, Gege has always spoken very positively about Bleach, but you can also see some inspiration in Black Clover. For example, Asa's transformation is strongly inspired by Ichigo's Hollow transformation. But of course, Naruto and One Piece have also had a strong influence on manga today. I also want to clarify once again that inspiration is completely normal. Bleach was influenced by Yu Yu Hakusho, JJK by Bleach, and today's manga by JJK. For me personally, Bleach is the best of the big three. And that's exactly why I always find it a bit sad when people don't want to give the anime or even the manga a chance. Simply because many anime fans speak badly about Bleach. But what about you? Do you like Bleach, and what is your favorite of the big three? By the way, if you have watched the video up to this point, feel free to write con in the comments. Thank you so much and see you next time.